Welcome to the American Liberties video. I got another series I'd like to talk about, and I got plenty more coming. But today I'd like to discuss the words and phrases of entanglement. The words mean everything, and words, of course, have definitions. In law, as well as contract law and everything, they have what they call terms. And terms defines a definition to be used primarily in that uh, realm, in that jurisdiction, however you want to think of it. The biggest trap, though, that most people ignore is a trade or business. Go up to an individual and say, hey, what trade or business are you in? Oh, I'm a plumber, I'm a dishwasher, I'm a cook. I mean, they give their trades, a brick mason, a concrete mason, whatever. They think of trade or business in a general term, but but in specifically the IRS code, trade or business means a public office, which we're going to go into the definition of a public office. But the synonymous words are wages, personal service, United States, and the statutory U.S. citizen and U.S. person. Actually, I should have put the statutory in the beginning of everything, because wages, you would think, well, I'm making a wager on a bet, or I work and my wages are X amount of money per hour. However, in the IRS code, wages are paid to public officers. In I think it's 6331, where it says, on a lien and levy, is to be issued to officers and yada, yada, yada. Well, that means they were implemented by the trade or business. Today, we're just going to talk about trade or business and public office. People must be aware that the method they are connecting you with is a franchise. Trade or business is by way of a W-4 agreement or a W-9, which are details that I will go into later. 267701 definitions is found at that link. And item number 26, the term, see, remember what I said about term? The term trade or business includes the performance of the function of a public office. Now, this is where it really gets interesting. Not surprised that the IRS does not define public office. However, we rely on other sources, to wit, Black's Law Dictionary is a great source. Basically, it's a law dictionary. Public office, the right, authority, duty created and conferred by law, by which for a given period, either fixed by law or enduring the pleasure of creating power, an individual is invested in some portion of the sovereign functions of government for the benefit of the public. Now, I took out the sites because there's many of them. They'll go to one court case and then 5 or 6 other court cases. And typing all of this out, number one, it's a lot of work, but two, I wanted to get it before I wanted to get this done before I turn 90. an agency of the state, the duties of which involved in their performance is exercise of some portion of the sovereign power. Now, when it said an agency of the state, that hit home to me because the definition of an agency in Florida law, and you can assume if it means that in Florida, it means that everywhere else. An agency is the executive branch, which is the governor. In this case, it might be the president. If state taxes, it might be the governor. Well, it is the governor. The definition is the governor exercising powers other than those derived from the Constitution. See, it's powers other than the Constitution. In other words, it's not representing the Constitution. It's relying on powers other than the Constitution. So it's the governor exercising commerce, which he's allowed to do. In fact, you want him to do it. You just don't want him to involuntarily persuade you into being a public office. Now let's read on. Okay, either great or small, another site omitted, where by virtue of law a person is clothed not as an incidental or transitive authority, but for such time as denotes duration of continuance, with independent power to control the property of the public, or with public functions to be exercised in the supposed interests of the people, the service to be compensated. Let me move up. By a stated yearly salary, an occupant having a designation or title to position so created is a public office. You can find that at Black's Law Dictionary, 4th edition, under page 35. When I went to confirm it, it was under the heading of officer. You know, I started looking up public office, not looking at the page number, and I can see I was a lot further along than the page number, so I had to back up. And on 1235. Also, Bouvier's Law Dictionary on page 2765 pretty much says exactly the same thing. Now, Black's Law Dictionary, 6th edition, clarifies the meaning of the public office below. Essential characteristics. Now, this is the essential characteristics of a public office. Authority conferred by law, fixed tenure of office, and power to exercise some of the sovereign functions of government. The key element of such tests is that the officer is carrying out a sovereign function, site omitted. Essential elements to establish a public position as a public office are: position must be created by the Constitution, legislature, or through authority conferred by legislature. I stopped to think about one of my main arguments when confronted with the IRS is that the 16th Amendment, which, by the way, Supreme Court said that it offered no new taxing powers or no new subjects to taxation, but be as it is. the 16th Amendment was when it was allegedly, which it wasn't properly, but when it was allegedly implemented into the Constitution, ratified, it gave the power to Congress to lay and collect taxes, but it never conferred that power to the secretary. At least I cannot find any law that gives evidence to that. In fact, my main question is, where is the law from which Congress extended the authority to the secretary for you, agent, to even speak to me? And by the way, where's your delegation of authority to speak to me? So anyhow, we move on. Portion of the sovereign power of government must be delegated to position. Duties and powers must be defined directly or implied by legislature through legislative authority. Duties must be performed independently without control of superior power other than law, and position must have some permanency. That's in Black's Law 6th edition. American Jurisprudence Legal Encyclopedia further clarifies that what a public office is. And I read, as expressed otherwise, the powers delegated to a public officer are held in trust for the people and are to be exercised in behalf of the government or on all citizens who may need the intervention of the officer, cite omitted. Furthermore, the review that has been expressed within whatever branch and whatever level of government and whatever be their private vocation are trustees of the people and accordingly labor under every disability of prohibition imposed by law upon trustees relative to the making of personal financial gain from a discharge of their trust. Again, cite omitted. That is, a public officer occupies a fiduciary relationship to the political entity on whose benefit he or she serves and owes a fiduciary duty to the public. It has been said that the fiduciary responsibility of a public officer cannot be less than those of a private individual. Furthermore, it has been stated that an enterprise undertaken to public official which tends to weaken public confidence and undermines the sense of security for individual rights is against public policy. And you can find that right there in 2nd D, Public Officers and Employees, section 247. Now, here's what the secretary tells us in regulations about a trade or business. Generally, the medium in which remuneration is paid is also immaterial. It may be paid in cash or something other than cash, as for example, stocks, bonds, and other forms of property. See, however, 31.3401A 11-1 relating to the exclusion of wages, not exemptions. Exclusion is a more separated word. Of remuneration paid in any medium other than cash for services, not in the course services not in the course of the employer's trade or business. And section 3401, blah, blah, blah. But then you go down to the one referred to above, 26 CFR 31.3401A11-1. Remunerations paid in any medium other than cash or services, not in the course of trade or business, is accepted from wages and hence is not subject to withholding. So if you're not in a trade or business, then you're not subject to, at least that's the way that I understand it. You know, it's telling me that I'm excluded, not exempt, but excluded. And so maybe instead of writing exempt on your W-4, you write excluded and you say not involved in a trade or business. Now they have to come back and show you the evidence of how you are in a course of the employer's trade or business. Now you could probably be working, I'm not a tax expert, but you could probably work for, well, the federal government really doesn't have any offices except for the office of the president, the secretary and treasurer and all that. But if you're working under a contract, let's say Lockheed, and they want, you know, that is basically a private organization that has a government contract. They're not involved in a trade or business. And if they volunteer to be listed as a trade or business, then it doesn't enforce you to be a trade or business. But that's something we can deal with later. So based on the foregoing, one cannot be a public office if there is a statute or constitutional authority that specifies, creates the office. All public offices can only be created through legislative authority. You know, a constitutional authority can't just pop out of nowhere. Their duties are not specified and exactly enumerated in some act of Congress. They have, again, they cannot be a public office if they have a boss or immediate supervisor. Like a revenue agent is not a public office. You know, he's not in a trade or business, although he works for somebody that has immediate supervision over him and is their boss. And all duties must be performed independently. They have, they're not a public office that they have anyone but the law or the courts to immediately supervise their activities. Okay, the foregoing cannot be a public officer if they have anyone but the law, okay, I get it. Anyone but the law of the courts to immediately supervise their activities. They are serving as a public officer in a location not specifically authorized by law. They must create the office and specify exactly where it is to be exercised. Now that goes into territorial jurisdiction, doesn't it? They must create the office and specify exactly where it is to be exercised. And 4 U.S.C. Section 72 says all, this is my golden statute, okay? This is what I used in the in front of the grand jury. And probably next month, I'll be showing you all that. But all public offices of the seat of the government shall be exercised in the District of Columbia and not elsewhere, except as otherwise provided by law. Pretty strong language there. Their position does not carry with it some kind of fiduciary duty to the public, which in turn is documented in and enforced by enacted law itself. The beneficiary of the fiduciary duty is other than a public. Public service is a public trust. And the beneficiary of the trust is the public at large and not any one specific individual or group of individuals. See CFR 2635, blah, 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 Executive Order 12731. A public officers must take an oath. The oath, in fact, is what creates a fiduciary duty that attaches to the office. This is confirmed by the definition of a public official in Black's Law Dictionary. Public official, a person who, upon being issued a commission, taking required oath, enters upon of a fixed tenure, a position called an office where he or she exercised in his or her own right some of the attributes of sovereign he or she serves to the benefit of public. The holder of a public office through not all of the sovereign power, whether great or small. On the same page as officer, you see on page 1230. An oath of the United States, federal and state officials are prescribed in the very first enactment of Congress, March 4th, 1789, as follows. And I got it right here. Be enacted. The representative of the United States of America in Congress assembled, that the oath or affirmation required, by the 6th article of the Constitution. Now, I highlighted that because I don't believe you'll ever find any oath of office that was prescribed by the 6th article. You may find it in the 1st article. Article 1 is where all the, that's Congress, the legislative branch, which, they're making law. This one is an oath to enforce the law that they made. And I don't think you'll find that. There's a lot of evidence right now, or lack of evidence, I should say, that Biden, there's a bunch of lawyers that did a Freedom of Information Act, and it appears that the whole administration is not in possession of any oath. And of course, like law, it, takes a long time for it to come to the surface, but it's coming. And it goes on, and then it goes on that members of the several state legislatures at the next session of said legislatures, respectfully, and all executive and judicial officers of the several states who have been there to chosen and appointed shall be chosen or appointed before the first day of August, blah, 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 but they too shall follow the same oath of office. Now, it goes on for the instructions of a W-9. The W-9 is one of my favorite documents because I've been working under it for many, many, many years. And here's the first page of the instructions to show you that I'm getting it out of the revised 2022. But on page 2, it has here, trade or business reporting only, right? And for people that have this kind of, well, it is what it is. You are engaged in a trade or business if you operate for gain or profit. However, nonprofit organizations are considered to be engaged in a trade or business and are subject to these reporting requirements. Other organizations subject to the reporting requirements includes trust of qualified pensions or profit-sharing plans of employers. Certain organizations exempt. See again, keep in mind the two words, exempt and excluded. They're not excluded, they're exempt from certain taxes, okay, under section 501C or D. Farmers, cooperatives, and other are exempt from under the taxation. And then when you look at the W4, the W9, which implements the 1099 that the employer wants to send to you, there is no OMB number. Now, this is to prove it's not for the public service. There's got to be an OMB number. Now, I'm not going to get into the OMB argument, but you can see there's no OMB number. And see below attached documents for law and IRS explanation. Even the IRS will tell you right here, this notice given under the Privacy Act of 1974 and the Paperwork Reduction Act of 1995. The Privacy Act, the Paperwork Reduction Act requires that the IRS Revenue Service inform businesses and other entities following when asking for information. So when the IRS sends you a request, you got to ask them, is this mandatory or is this volunteer? Got to know. The inquiring mind got to know. Respondents should be aware that notwithstanding any other provisions of law, no person shall be subject to any penalty for failing to comply with the collection of information. It does not display a valid OMB number, control number. So you give that to the employer right there. Say, look, I'm following the IRS law. What are you following? What are you following, sucker? All right, anyhow. The Public Protection Act, 443512. Notwithstanding any other provisions of law, no persons, that's me, employer, no person shall be subject to any penalty for failing to comply with the collection of information that is subject to subchapter if the collection of information does not display a valid control number assigned by the director in accordance with the subchapter, or the agency fails to inform the person who is to respond to the collection of information that such person is not required to respond to the collection information unless it displays a valid control number. And the protection provided by this section may be raised at the form of a complete, may be raised in the form of a complete defense, bar, or otherwise at any time during the agency administrative process or judicial action against thereto. So this tells you want to handle it administratively. Well, that's what I wanted to cover today. I hope this enlightens some people. And with that being said, God bless America. This call is now officially over. Bye-bye.